There we go. All right. Hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Becoming a Management Scientist podcast. This technically will be chapter 7, but it's kind of a continuation on the last chapter, which was the culture of abuse, talking about the independent fundamental Baptist churches. And I have a very special guest with me today, Miss Ginny Foreign, who pretty much went to the same church as me. It just was on a little different timeline because her parents were missionaries to Brazil. But I'm going to let Ginny kind of introduce herself, tell us about, growing up, what it was like. And then I'm going to ask her a few questions, and we may relive some of our past, now what we see as trauma of growing up in this specific denomination of church. So Ginny, I will let you take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you remember this, Becca, but we were basically best friends in third grade.
We were.
I mean, we were like inseparable. We went to this tiny little school. I think there were probably 17 kids in our class or something like that. But as she mentioned, I'm a missionary kid. And so I had been living overseas for like all my life that I could remember at that point. And so that year was my first intro back into the States, which was always a culture shock coming back. But I have very happy memories of third grade. And I think a big part of it's probably because I had like a bestie in Becca. So
that was a good year. I think I remember too, people back in the day, it may not look it now, but people back in the day very much got us confused with each other for a long time because we did look very similar back then.
Yep. We're about the same height, brown hair, brown eyes. Side note, we won't speak about this too much. We actually did have a dreadful teacher that year, speaking of cultures of abuse. But again, I don't remember too much about that because I was having a pretty good time. So, so I was born into a pastor's family. My parents were, my dad was a pastor of a independent fundamental Baptist church, the same one Becca mentioned that was in East Tennessee. And so I was going to church the day I was born. And it was just always part of life. And then when I was 3 or 4, my parents decided to be missionaries. And so we moved to Brazil. And I spent most of the rest of my growing up years there. My parents are still there. There are positives and there are negatives of my growing up experience. I think the positives are that I had a very tight-knit family, and my dad in particular is a very moderate person his personality is very moderate. So some of the more extreme beliefs of the environment I was in were just moderated by him. He didn't buy into it. So that helped a little bit. And definitely, within the home, there was a value on caring for each other and respect and, and that kind of thing. And I do look back now, and I've always said that despite my dad's theology, which I strongly disagree with now in a lot of areas, he put a premium on like loving people and on relationship. And I think probably that saved me in the end was that had been modeled like despite like all these other things that I ended up really rejecting. And that like idea that people matter most and that we ought to love each other probably carried through stronger than other things, which is I'm very grateful for. But I mean, when I describe how I grew up, most people feel like it was a cult. So couldn't wear pants. I wore skirts or culottes my whole life till I was in my 20s, early 20s, which is so hard to believe. I did not go to a movie theater until I was in my early 20s. Well, that's a lie. If my mom listens to this, she'll now hear my confession that I once went I believe I was in second grade, and I didn't know that I was going to a movie theater. I just went to my friend's house, and then her aunt took us, and I felt so guilty. We saw Back to the Future, and I was sure that I was going to hell because I had gone, but I did not tell my parents. So wasn't allowed to go to movie theaters. No, music was Off limits if it had a syncopated beat, because apparently that's of the devil. And yeah, lots of other oddities that come along with those really strict churches. And then somewhere I knew I was different in my high school years. And when I say you're different, you don't really know that. You can only live your own experience. And so, you're just yourself and you don't realize that everybody else doesn't feel like you. But I had much stronger like feelings and connections to my girlfriends than my guy friends and even the guys I dated. So I had an inkling that I was, maybe not quite like everybody else, but it took until I went to college to actually realize that I was actually gay. And honestly, part of it, looking back now, is that I didn't have words. No one had said words about, even what's now like couched in Christian language, like same-sex attraction or something like that. Like even the concept wasn't presented to me growing up. And I think when you don't have words to form the idea, you don't understand. And so I wasn't exposed really to, any kind of like discussion of homosexuality or being gay or anything like that until I was a young adult. And I realized it's funny now because I can't remember now when I look back. I'm like, when did it really click? And I'm not entirely certain. I remember sometime my like sophomore or junior year talking to someone. I went to this very conservative university called Bob Jones University. That's the whole thing all by itself. There, like you get kicked out for being gay. So at least at the time. But I do remember talking, there were like maybe two people I sat down and talked to about it. And somehow in my head, I knew they were safe because they both were contextual to that situation. They were both very conservative, but were willing to be like, they kind of gave me the like, well, just pray and love Jesus and unwanted feelings will go away. We're all sinners, that kind of thing. So what I'm grateful for looking back now is neither of them suggested conversion therapy, because my friends who've been through conversion therapy got really messed up. And they did suggest the pray away option, but it was more of like a personal thing. And then in my late college years, I got into a relationship with this woman. And that was really when it just kind of punched me in the face. And it's funny actually now, looking back, how I always tell people about it is I thought I was a really good Christian because I did not want to sleep with any of my boyfriends. And I couldn't understand why other people couldn't control themselves. And I was just a very, very good Christian and, gold star for me. And then I get into this relationship with this woman and like, oh man, like all the rules go out the window. Like it suddenly didn't matter, like all the things I believed, like just poof, gone. And so that was really when it clicked. It was like, this is the experience everybody's talking about. This is how you feel, that you feel so overwhelmed and you feel so in love and you feel so like, simultaneously happy and like, and then like so easily fragile and able to break, and things like this. So that was when it all came together and made sense. I was like, oh, okay. I now relate to other people's feelings and all the movies I've seen my whole life. It just turns out that I only feel this way about women. And so I just kept that a secret. I ended up breaking up with that woman because honestly, we were just both still trying really hard to be good Christians and feeling really guilty. And so we just went our separate ways. And I got really mad at God for a while. I went to grad school, which was not a Christian school. So I was like the first time I was leaving that environment. And then I went and lived overseas for a while, not in a missional environment, just by myself. And during that time, I just got super mad at God, but also just more, and also very much convinced, like more and more convinced, like I am definitely gay. And this is the first time I said it out loud and, started to actually process it. Came back, decided that I would, well, I'll say this, that was only part of my like life, because like unpeeling fundamentalism is like, even though being gay is a very dramatic part of it, it's like, as you know, Becca, there's so many layers of unlearning with the things you get with fundamentalism. So that was an important part of my journey, but I was also like going through a lot of other things. And so at the time in my early 20s, I was like, well, my solution was I'm just going to go to a more liberal church. And more liberal church was like still very conservative. It just, it just wasn't independent fundamental. They let me wear pants and they listened to things with syncopated beats. So, but in that time, I did become convinced that like I didn't have to choose. A lot of people are given this like really binary choice of like choose to be gay or choose God. You do not get both. And I did become convinced, like just in my own spirit, like I don't have to choose.
Yeah.
And so I think that probably also saved me. But I lived most of my 20s to my early 30s as what they call a side B, LGBT Christian, which is to say that I just thought I needed to be celibate. I could be openly gay, but like I shouldn't try to marry a straight person, but like I just shouldn't, have sex. And then through a series of circumstances in my late 20s, just really peeled that apart and was like, honestly, this is like untenable and unhealthy.
Yeah.
And I don't see a lot of people living this out in a healthy way. And I don't think this is what, as like humans, are not meant to live this way. And so I just started like slowly. I'd become it was weird. It was like I'd become affirming towards other people, but not towards myself. So it was finally like affirming towards myself, and was like, all right, I'm allowed to date, I think. And so the last like 7 or 8 years have been living out a much more open and affirming existence. But yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Your stories, before we get into the questions, your stories up until the college years, because I did go to Northland for that one semester. And see, I kind of knew, and I'm sure people remember my senior year, wasn't so into the youth group. And I think that's because at that time I started realizing I'm not buying what they're selling. Like it was more and more, I was like, I'm not buying this, because I had worked with a few gay friends and I was like, I love them. These are my people. I was like, this is my, they had actually taken me out to a gay bar to see drag. And I was like, this is a great world. What is going on?
Yeah. I love it here.
But I was like, I'm not really buying what we're selling, because too, I remember looking back and thinking the bus kids that would come in, there was this kind of separate, but unequal like rule. And I was like, this isn't what this should be about. Like, it was really like, let's get them in, but you don't associate, you're holier than thou. And so I did go to Northland for that semester. And when that semester was done, I was like, no more. This isn't for me. But see, every time, with your friends that said, oh, we'll pray it away, every time I would walk back into that church, it would be not the older ladies that were friends with my mom, because obviously my mother still goes to that church. It wouldn't be the ladies that were friends with her. It would be people that had been my age, or, some of the newer people. They're like, we're just praying for you. You'll find it. We know you've lost your way. And I was like, I've not lost anything.
So patronizing.
I'm like, I haven't lost anything. And then I went for a little bit longer into my 20s. I would go occasionally. And then I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that I'm okay with. And then kind of one of the final straws was when the election happened in 2016. When that whole debacle happened, one person that we actually were in the youth group with, who was maybe a year younger than us, their quote was, Well, he may not be the most righteous person, but I can't vote for Hillary because she'll take away my Christianity.
Mm. Oof.
I'm sorry.
Just legislate it away.
Okay, great. But yeah, so and and finding like, having gay male best friends, it kind of also made me realize that I wasn't completely straight. And, I think my attraction was more to who my personality fit with better.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I realized, when transgender came like really fully to the forefront, I was like, it really, gender is a construct. So it really doesn't matter if I date somebody that's a male transitioning to a female, just as long as my personality. So really when the term pansexual came to being, I was like, that's me.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, I don't find myself super attracted. I don't like straight men.
Yeah.
So I don't find myself super attracted to them, but it's just, it's whoever my personality is like meshes the most with. And, I think everybody, like I said, I didn't really fully just like open the door and come out. I think everybody kind of in my family and in my direct path knew, because I had dated a girl once before. But again, my mom is very much like, it's not real. But yeah. So on that note, for a question is like, how did you come out to your family? Like how was that process? Because I'm sure that was pretty, kind of a little scary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And and it's so it is so difficult. I was just talking to somebody about this recently because the way, and you've probably experienced this too a little bit, Becca, but one of the unique things about marginalized queer people, so there are many commonalities between marginalized populations, but one thing that is a little bit unique to being queer or transgender, LGBT, lesbian, gay, whatever, pan, like just you are like your parents' worst nightmare. You know, there's not a lot else out there that can cause families and parents in particular to like reject their kids.
Yeah.
There are, in some of the more extreme corners of Christianity, like just changing any of your beliefs about Christianity, like and going to a different church can cause those rifts. But there's a much larger group of people who just really like, I mean, I knew it growing up. My parents didn't have to say it. I just knew like this was like one of their worst nightmares. I am grateful that my parents would rather that I came out than that I die. Yeah. Some people I've had friends, their parents or people in their family have literally like said, like, I wish you would have died instead of turning into a gay person, and you're like, wow, that is rough. That is so bad, So I think that to me is the both part of my story, and then it's the thing I always just bear in mind. It's like, why did it take me so long to come out to them? Because it did take me to my early 30s. It wasn't really until I became affirming that I decided to come out to them, because when I was celibate, it just felt like I don't have to tell them because I'm not going to do anything about it. I told my friends, I told like other community, but I don't have to tell my parents. I'll just be that, weird single aunt.
Yeah.
But obviously on the like, okay, well now I'm affirming. Well, I'm not going to tell them when I show up at their house with my girlfriend in tow, right? Like that's not cool. So, and bound up in our own family dynamics, we just really struggle to talk about things we disagree about. Like that just is real. Like my family wants to love each other. Again, kind of puts a premium on relationship. Yeah. But that said, like, had never developed a healthy way of discussing conflict or things that we disagree on. So my advice to anyone is give yourself a ton of grace. Your family has unique dynamics, and however you're going to come out, you do it in the way that works for you. So the way that worked for me was to write my parents a letter. Yeah. Because I was going to come out to them face to face, and I just couldn't do it. I just kept trying to be like, I'm going to sit them down and look them in the eye. And then it was kind of in processing my family dynamics and realizing I have no history of speaking about difficult things with my family. So you know what? I'm going to let myself off the hook. I'm going to write this all out in a letter. the words I mean to say will be there.
Yeah.
And then I will give that same letter to like my parents and my brothers. My sister already knew, but my two brothers at the same time. So, as expected, I mean, it was obviously very difficult for them.
Yeah.
My parents are they're not the type to reject me or be like, we never want to see you again. Absolutely not. But I don't believe that their beliefs can accommodate my existence. And so it was just going to be really mentally unsettling and spiritually and emotionally unsettling, which it was. I mean, my dad didn't say anything. I was kind of like, he kind of reaffirmed that he loved me and didn't say anything. My mom had to tell me that the only right path for me was to never marry. And then God bless, my second brother was like, I don't think we should talk at Jenny. I think we should listen to Jenny because I think she's probably been doing a lot more thinking about this than any of us.
Yeah.
And so he like really came to my aid and was just sort of set the tone for subsequent conversation.
Yeah.
I will be honest, I have had less than 10 minutes. That was 5 years ago. And I have had less than 10 minutes conversation about this since then with my parents. They are not, kind of like your mom, the ignoring, they're not able to talk about it. It's like they don't know how. And so we just don't.
Yeah.
But this last year, you talked about politics. The last year prior to the election leading up to January 6th, got so contentious in the family over politics that we did kind of, myself, my sister, and my second brother finally just kind of confronted my parents and were like some of the things that have been written over text and over family, group text or email, or like it is not okay. We can disagree, but like you don't get to say things with like this this horrible tone and like accusation. And so and around that same time I sort of just decided, like, I've seen some other people, just good examples to me, models to me, and I was like, honestly, if my parents don't want to talk about it, fine, but I'm not going to pretend, like, just going to be honest. So if it's like, hey, my girlfriend, or hey, I go to this progressive, church, or I have two female pastors, I love them, I'm just going to say all these things, and I can see you squirming when I say them. That's on you. You get to ask questions, but you're an adult too.
Yeah.
So
that's kind of how my mom is very much the solidly watches Fox News and is hardcore. And we had a very tiny conversation because I could not understand why she would vote for Donald Trump. And I was like, because my mom is usually this absolutely, she loves everyone. My mom is super
I remember
sweet.
her that way.
She's just the sweetest. And I was like, but for you to vote for someone that literally hates the existence of so many people, of colored people, of, anyone that's Black, brown, anyone that's an LGBTQ, as much as he loves to pretend that he's an ally, how can you justify that? And she brought up the same, well, I'm trying to save my religion. I'm trying to save my faith. And all I could think of yelling at her was, in reality, in the last 20 years, when has there been a war on your brand of Christianity? And she, she's like a lot of other ones that, well, being gay isn't, that's part of it. They're bringing about this. And I'm like, they're living their life. And she's very much one of those people that, and I mentioned this in my last podcast, the love the sinner, hate the sin. And I was like, I can't hear you justify that, because that essentially means you hate every aspect of the way they live their life. And she used a word. She was like, it's a choice. And I was like, oh, this is where we're going to end this conversation. Because she's not one to talk either. She's not one to talk about mental health issues. And she's one of those things where it's like, just pray it away. And I've had to learn to not talk to her. I've had to talk to friends about, like, if I've had a panic attack, because the one time I did, and I called her, the first thing she said to me was, you just need to calm down. And it was like, click. let me finish this panic attack out by myself. But that's how, and I guess we'll get into that too, how this church really shapes opinions about LGBTQ, but also mental health and anything that doesn't fit into their idea of what the church should be about. And one thing that happened in this last year too, this last couple of years, Jody Jenkins, I heard about that. Yeah, he went through, I may not agree with a lot of the things that he used to preach, a lot of the things he said, but he is someone that went through a time of a really deep depression. And honestly, like hearing even my own mother, she explained it as, well, he just lost his faith. And I'm thinking, no, depression it's a chemical imbalance in your head. It's not a loss of faith. This is something that is mentally going on. This is something that is helped by, therapy. It's something that's helped by, drugs to take for depression. And there's no shame in that. And it was like hearing everyone on Facebook just, oh, we're praying for him. And then behind closed doors, it's just faith. Oh, yuck. And that's, that's part of that culture of abuse. That's how, these kids that like their parents are doing horrible things to them. It's never talked about, but we'll talk about people who have depression or who are gay and
it's lump them all into a bucket of people who just don't believe enough. And there's just so many people who you can just slide into that bucket.
It's anyone that's not and doesn't fit our brand is what it is. And my mom kept saying that she would love for me to go back to church. And I was like, I never lost my faith. I just have found that to live basically more like what Christ did is to be open, is to love, is to want to help people out. And there was a church in downtown Charleston that had, it was basically, they had this huge sign that said trans people are people too, and they deserve to be here. And I was like, that's what I want to go to. And I just, sometimes I don't understand how they can't see that. It's just that's like the worst thing ever to them is to see something like that. Because to point out like what you were talking about before, not being able to go to movies, listening to any music that had a beat, and that included contemporary Christian music. Like we were not allowed to listen to that. I remember we had I don't know if it was my junior year, we had this bonfire at someone's house where we burned all the CDs of anything that we had that was worldly. Great way to help the planet and our lungs, but
no, it's just so weird. That's one of those things that only shows up also in like Christian conversation forums. It's like when some, one of the new questions people have to post is, tell us your ex without telling us, right? So whatever it might be, in this case, tell us your Christian without telling us. And I've written it and seen others write it as like, well, once I burned my Britney Spears CD in order to please Jesus, and like, and it's, you're like, that sounds crazy.
No, it happened. We had a huge bonfire to do it. And, not being able to wear pants to go to a Gatlinburg, which is essentially a ski resort. But and then, obviously for people who don't know, the colleges that she graduated from, but the one that I went to for a month, it was even more like a lot stricter than even the high school that we went to. But the college that I went to, the church didn't even approve of it, even though it was a Baptist college, because the reasoning behind it was you didn't have to use the King James Version in your personal devotions. So that was why they were like, oh, well, we can't support you in going to this school.
No, our this church that Beck and I went to is one of, again, a niche part of Christianity that as I move among people who grew up in Christian circles of many flavors have never even heard of. Like they like, again, their eyes get like this, like, whoa, this was a thing,
Yeah.
but we heard it so much living in a space where there's literally only one version of the Bible. It was an English version. That's irony right there. And then people love to say, it was what was it, Becca's the 16 something version, the 1690 something
the
version.
1611 or something
1611,
like that.
yeah, that's right. 1611 King James, right? So here in DC, there's the Museum of the Bible, and it has its pros and cons. That's another conversation about going to the Museum of the Bible and liking it or not. But there's a floor that exhibits Bibles from like all over the world and very old manuscripts, new. And there's this 1611 King James, and right next to it is a little plaque that says, some Protestants claim to read this version. Actually, they're reading like the 1889 version.
Yeah.
And I was like,
joke's on you.
Yeah.
And I think it's not even just like the course of the language. It's because I think other versions take out like some passage. I don't even know which one it was. It was some passage. They take it out because they're like, we don't even know if this existed.
Yeah.
And the church was like, no, Jesus said this. He wrote it. We know. And I'm like, were you there?
Yeah.
Were you there?
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Absolutely.
It's crazy when, like even looking back, I know another friend of ours who we've talked about this too. I guess you don't remember, but when we went to Mexico and we were we got pickpocketed on a subway in Mexico City, which can happen anywhere. This is not just Mexico City. It can happen in DC. It can happen in New York.
We were a very obvious group of white kids.
Oh,
and in our culottes. So.
And having cameras around our neck. We were prime targets. Yep. Well, during this whole course, some of the girls got touched in a very, inappropriate kind of way at the time. I assume we were still getting pickpocketed. That's why, but not to downplay it. But our youth pastor at the time was like, well, we don't need to talk about it because it'll give Satan the glory. And I'm like, so this is how we're taught to process anything bad that happens to us. This is how we're taught to process any form of mental instability is, oh, don't talk about it because it'll give Satan the glory.
Yep.
And I don't know how your mental health has been or how it would have been had you stayed in that type of church. But I know that looking back on it, I see that there was a good chunk of time that I was like, I should have gotten help then. I should have been able to go into therapy then. But of course, in the type of denomination that we were in, it wasn't, they would have just said, oh, we just need to pray it away. Come to the altar and pray it away. Yeah. And I think that was more damaging than anything. So.
No, I think that's great. I think we should totally talk about the impact of our beliefs on mental health. Cause I actually think the thread of being gay is, I jokingly say, like, if I hadn't been gay, I wouldn't have gotten out of fundamentalism. And so I think that's the blessing of it, is like, I couldn't reconcile it. And so at the end of the day, it had to pull me forward, had to pull me on. But what the real damage to me from fundamentalism was not what it said to me about being gay. Because I was somehow spared, maybe because of not going to conversion therapy and things like that. I was relatively spared from self-loathing around being gay. I also came to it kind of late. And so for the most part, I never hated myself for that. My thing was fear and anxiety. That had just been, we had been given so many reasons from such a young age to be terrified of the world, right? The apocalyptic predictions and world ending. I mean, like what your mom said, like, they're going to take my faith, like that kind of thing. Like the world was against us and we were going to probably die in fighting for our faith. And so the world is not safe, and you're continually given that as a message growing up.
And I don't think people understand when we're talking about this, when we say young age, this is like, you are taught about the book of Revelations at age 3, 4, 5 and up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, early formative years. And then on the flip side of that, you are taught, and particularly in spaces where we moved, you know, God is just so ready to throw you into hell, and burn you forever in fire. And so, you know, I step out of it now and I go, I cannot imagine communicating to a 4 or 5-year-old child that they have the potential of like eternal conscious torment in a lake of fire, and that is the, and like that's, and not only is that the like their potential future, but it's the future of most people in the world, right?
Yeah.
And so that those two things combined, like I had developed full-blown anxiety by the time I was 17 or 18, and didn't, you know, similarly didn't have words. I didn't know what it was. I just knew I could get in these panics that would keep me up all night, in cold sweats. And I had this one stretch of time, oh gosh, after a he who shall not be named evangelist came to the church and preached hell and fire and brimstone down on all of us. And I literally was like agoraphobic for a week. I couldn't leave the house. I was so afraid. I just was like, I'm going to die and I'm not saved. I'm going to die and I'm not saved. And like my dad had to like talk me down because I just couldn't function. Because, you know, you got to know that you're saved. And it's like, you know, pardon my language, but like the fucking human experience doesn't allow you to know yourself like that. You know?
And it's like, I had that same, like, cause it was always, you know, they would have these, for other people listening that don't maybe have the same kind of, they would have altar calls at the end of the service. And it was like, if you feel convicted, and I'm like, well, what? I don't know. I prayed this prayer. Is that not all there is? But should I feel this way? And then I realized it's just anxiety of like, they put that little seed of doubt in your head. It's not you, it's not the world. It's them putting the seed of doubt in your head.
And they keep you on this loop, you know? So when I was in my mid-20s, a friend of mine died somewhat suddenly, a few days after I'd seen him, and he died in an airplane crash. So like a jetliner went down in New York, and there were about 80 people on board, and he was one of them, and he died. And that was the first time in my life I couldn't get on a plane. Like, and I needed to, like, I have parents live overseas, and my job required travel, and I couldn't get on a plane. I was having horrible multi-day long panic attacks and things like that. And that was the first time I really dealt with real crippling anxiety. And I dealt with it for a solid 7 or 8 years before I finally got into an environment where somebody was like, well, one, I got so bad I went to a doctor.
Yeah.
And the doctor was like, sleeping pills, you need to sleep. Go see a therapist. And I was like, okay. And so I went and saw a non-Christian therapist.
Yeah.
And was like, I can't sleep and I can't manage my anxiety. And she was the first person who was like, well, you're not crazy. And by the way, this is how your body works. It's how your emotions work. We're going to give you some coping mechanisms. I want you to practice. And all of a sudden, this monster that had been following me around for a decade, like, started to become manageable. With things that had nothing to do with Christianity. Yeah. Nothing to do with the Bible, nothing to do with praying. And because none of those things I won't say that none of those things ever helped, but they hadn't cured it. They hadn't permanently diminished it. And all of a sudden I had like coping mechanisms that were working, and the option of medication. So all that to say, like, I do look back now and go, I developed that kind of anxiety because of the environment I grew up in. I'm sure I was genetically born a slightly anxious person, but unfortunately for people like us, that environment takes that and just blows it up.
Because I knew something, much how you said you knew something was, you were kind of different, you know, like, which would have led into, you know, you realizing, oh, I'm gay. Mine was very much, okay, there's something in my brain is not like clicking. And it would be times of which I now realize is, crippling depression versus anxiety, having manic episodes, having depressive episodes, where it would be like, it would take everything I had to get out of bed. There would be, weeks that I would end up like not wanting to shower because I just couldn't make myself like get in there. And it was all I could do to get dressed. And my mom and then some of the ladies from the church, it would always be, well, she's just lazy. This is just laziness. And she just needs this. And you just need to pray. And now I've come to realize, no, that is good old depression. And it's called, being able to, again, coping mechanism, going to speak to a therapist. And I'm very fortunate to have a friend who is, has also is a licensed therapist. So there are times when I can speak to her and be like, okay, this is what's going on. Because she's the one that I call now when I have a panic attack. And, all she does is just start to talk to me about her day. And it makes it like, because I'm the type in a panic attack that I don't ever want someone to say, you need to calm down, because that's the worst thing you can say to anyone that's having a panic attack. Or that it's all in your head. I'm like, yeah, genius. I fucking know it's all in my head. That's the problem. But she'll just, if I'm not realizing that I'm having it, or she's not talking to me about it, she's talking to me about something else, I realize that my breathing starts to even out. I'm not in that tunnel where I feel like, oh, I'm dying right now. I'm really dying. Because the worst, I've had it twice driving down the interstate and had to pull off on the side of the road to be like, I'm dying. I'm going to wreck my car. I'm going to pass out. This is, and she gets that phone call, which usually even, for as close to friends we are, it's usually text messages. So she usually knows when there's a phone call, it's let me start talking about something else. And I wish that would have been something that would have happened, in my early teens, or like when this first started to happen. But again, in the environment that we grew up in, it wasn't a thing. It was always something to do with, you just got to pray it out of you.
It's spiritual.
And it's something spiritual.
Problem is spiritual. And I mean, I sat under teachers at Bob Jones who drilled that into my head. Like, your bad feelings, depression, it has a spiritual source. It can be solved by spiritual disciplines. There's basically the whole mental health industry is, bogus. Which is why I spent most of my 20s not going anywhere near it, because it had just been drilled into my head that was wrong, or it was weak, or it was untrue, or all these other things. And I remember reading, it's a couple years ago, but it's a very popular book, The Body Keeps Score. And the guy was describing PTSD symptoms. And I was like, oh my gosh, I exhibit these behaviors. And that's when I really started to come around to like religious trauma. Yeah. Because I didn't want to call, nobody wants to call their childhood trauma, and what they learned and stuff. Like, it's not something we want to do. And so in that book, reading through the symptoms and the different way people exhibit, behaviors as an adult, I was like, okay, I'm willing to say that I actually have like religious trauma. And that's part of why I struggle the way I do as an adult and have had to work through these things.
I didn't think of it necessarily that way at first either, but there is a podcast that they focus on the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church and like the dark little secrets and the things that go on. And it's the Preacher Voice podcast of all things that it's called. But they talk to people who grew up in, which we're very fortunate in the specific church that we went to in the specific school besides Bob Jones. The trauma that we have is very emotional. But there are people that they talk to that went to the Bill Gothard's like homeschool, the big school that he went to, that have the physical trauma that go along with it. And what people don't realize is it goes through, not just our denomination, but with how strict and how much of a patriarchal society that our denomination was,
Yep.
it's not uncommon. And they talk about the trauma and these people processing the trauma, and it's a religious, you know, it's a trauma that we got from this religious background.
Yep.
And the more I opened it up and the more I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, this is, looking back on it, looking back at all these, going Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, um, go, going door to door on Saturday mornings
Oh yeah.
to go canvas and make sure that these other people got saved, because that's what it was about. It wasn't just about, us getting saved. It was about getting as many people saved as we possibly could, because that's how you're going to earn your reward in heaven.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the more and more I thought about that, I was like, I got really messed up in my childhood and my teens. And, again, like when I got to my senior year and kind of a little bit after that, I started, like, my eyes started to open just a little bit. And I was like, this is the original multi-level marketing scheme, is this brand of church. And I was like, I can't buy into what you're saying anymore, because this isn't, it doesn't make me feel good.
No, absolutely. It's funny you bring up the like door to door, and the like evangelize. You probably remember briefly. Jody was at some level was one of the pastors that was around. I just remember him coming into youth group and being like, trying to get us to sign this certificate that said that we would witness to one person every day for the rest of our lives. Do you remember this?
I remember this.
I'm like, do you have courage to sign it? And that kind of thing. And so it's like a crux point of that whole pressure to like constantly be evangelizing people and that kind of thing. And I hated it. I hated, I did it all the time, because I also did it when I lived in Brazil, but like, it just felt horrible. It felt inauthentic. It felt, and that was supposed to be the devil that was trying to keep you from doing it, right? Like all these bad feelings you had, it was just the devil, so fight through it, that kind of thing. And in retrospect, when I look back now, I realized, no, I didn't want to do it because I didn't want to sell what we had. I was kind of miserable. I was afraid of God. I was, as we've mentioned, there's depression, there's anxiety. Like I didn't believe in the good news. I was not offering good news, because what I had received was not good news.
No.
And so like this idea that like you would, force other people into it. That was the inner tension, was like, I actually don't want to give what I'm supposed to be selling, because I don't believe in it.
Yeah.
I'm trying so hard to believe in it, but I
can't.
It's not good. I don't find it to be good. And so now it's like, of course you hated it and you were miserable. I ran into this. Yeah.
It was completely miserable. And for like, to explain a little bit more about what canvassing was, so people know that it's not, it was fun. You can see, I remember those, not just the tracts that our church would give out, but I don't know if you remember those the cartoon ones. They're laughable now, but it was like somebody going to watch, of course, Harry Potter wasn't out then, but it was like somebody going to watch Harry Potter. And then the next thing you know, they're like in a pit of fire. And it's
Chick tracks.
Yeah.
That's what they're called.
Yeah. And that's exactly what they would try to sell, because the outside of our church's tracks are these beautiful sceneries. And then on the inside, it's, you better pray this year you're going to hell. Mm-hmm. And they were more of the hellfire and damnation versus, Jesus sat down and broke bread with everybody. Mm-hmm. Like, you should, let's talk about that. But I still remember those little chick tracks. Those were, I look back on them now and I'm like, these are the funniest things. Like, this is not realistic. This isn't what this should be about. Oh, jeez.
Yeah. I found one in a bathroom within the last couple years. I was on my way to Tennessee, I'm sure, because it was in like a rest stop. And then I was like, oh, and I was like, oh, I remember doing that. I remember being like, you're supposed to hand out the tracts. Like, well, God, just leave it in the bathroom stall so somebody will pick it up.
And it was always like you leave it in the bathroom stall, or you leave it with your, instead of a tip for some of them, instead of a tip for your wait staff, let's just leave this track for these people. And it was always like, I don't know, it was kind of almost that they would question your Christianity if you didn't want to do it. Like, are you sure you're saved? Because you don't want to hand these out. You're not gonna have, it was always what you're gonna have, like straw to lay at Jesus's feet, because you won't have any riches because you didn't get people saved.
And you bring your
it's so
your souls
laughable now. I hate to, but all I can do is laugh. But there are people that drink that Kool-Aid that are still, and again, my mother is one of them, that still drink that Kool-Aid, that still have this and I think what it is for a lot of the people at the church that we went to, it's this, I don't want to say spiritual hierarchy. They just feel spiritually superior to other people. And our church specifically felt superior to a lot of other churches, and even in the area.
Oh yeah.
And it was like, you would hear certain churches' names and you would think, oh, that's where all the good kids go. And now just, looking back on it, I'm like, this is, we were very traumatized.
No, I think you're right. I think there's a superiority that's really comfortable, right? It's really nice to know that you're right, just be so sure of it. You don't have to ask hard questions. I also think that, certainty is really comfortable, and you have to work really hard to maintain it. But it's really comfortable. Like if you legitimately believe that, 98% of the world is black and white and 2% is gray, instead of the other way around, you can, as long as nothing too terrible happens, you can stay pretty comfortable. Like traumatic life events or meeting people who are good people who you kind of have to admit are good people, but like completely radically like disrupt your ideas. These are uncomfortable truths and people have to decide what to do with them. But I look at it now and I'm like, I remember needing to leave certainty and like be willing to walk in ambiguity, and I didn't love it. I wanted to know how to be and how to give my life meaning and what to believe. So it's not like it's super comfortable to leave, but it is like, for lack of a better way of putting it, it is a very immature way to move in the world. It's a very childish way in many ways, right? Like who needs concrete concepts that have and just believes authority? Kids, like 4 and 5-year-olds, we ask them to be like that. But by the time someone's 18 or 22 or 55, like they have to, for the most part, at least developmentally, like deal with some nuance and complexity and perplexity and things like that in the world. And faith is one of those areas where they try to convince us that doesn't happen. And that you can stay in this like childlike simplicity. And people do. It's not that not everybody will leave. It's just, I look at it now and I'm like, I know how you get stuck there. I just, I don't accept your critique of us now that we're heretics and reprobates.
The black sheep of that specific brand, because there's a few that have gotten out. One family, like I don't know if you remember the Hoppers.
Yes,
it was 5. So Barbara Hopper came back into town. I can't remember what her new married last name is. But she came into town like when I still lived in Tennessee, and she came in and she was like, does your mom still go to the church? And I said, yeah. And she just looked at me and she goes, why? And I was like, oh, I love this. I love you guys. Because I asked the same thing. I'm like, why? But she's one of those that just kind of got stuck in that. And she just doesn't, she's comfortable. She doesn't want to leave. She doesn't want to question anything. But to
Communal.
me, one of the weird things too was, with the not questioning is, they had several without our actual youth pastor that we had when we were there. They've had several youth pastors that they've asked to leave because their doctrine was changing. Mm-hmm. And looking back on some of them and what they were teaching, it was like, this isn't bad. What was, but it didn't fit. And they thought that anything new was going to just open that crack for that door of worldliness to come in. And that whole doctrine of separation, they weren't going to be able to follow that so hard anymore. But they would ask them to leave. And I'm like, you have these teens that have been with this same youth pastor for 5 or 6 years that have developed a relationship with him. And now you're asking him to leave, and they can't understand why. And they wouldn't explain to them why either. And I'm like, this is what gets people to leave. And this is what gets people, in a good way to leave, but also to just not to want to start to question. But, that's when they start to push away and we're praying for you. Yeah. You've lost it, but we're praying. Yeah. We're praying for you. And I'm like,
like they don't see their role in that.
Like you pushed this. And it was like I said, when we were talking about, the bus kids and this whole separation, it was, and I remember, and I don't know if you remember, but to the point that they had different Sunday school classes for the bus kids and the church kids. But they would say that it was separated out by what city you lived in. And there for a while, it was like some of the better church kids or whatever were put into the youth pastor's wife's class. I wasn't. I was in the other one. But they had their own like children's church and teen church because they didn't want them in the service. And the more I look back on that, I'm like, I feel terrible. Like that we were never open. We were never accepting to any of them. No. And it wasn't just because we were in our cliques, but it was also a kind of unwritten, you shouldn't get too close to them.
No, it's so interesting you say that. I think you're right. And it just like didn't compute at the time that 12 buses were busing kids and teenagers into our church. And I don't know any of their names.
I don't either. And we were expected to work on those buses. Like that was our thing, was we worked on those buses. And the more I look at it, I'm like, that just feels even more like we were supposed to be better. And I'm like, this isn't, again, that's part of what I thought was like, I can't buy what you're selling anymore for this. Yes, it's a great idea to have people that want to go to church to bus them in, but don't do it in the way that you're doing it.
I mean, I certainly knew some well-meaning people in their bus ministry that were kind and generous and genuine. But like you said, like the hierarchy and the separation inside the church was like absolute. Because I never remember building. I don't think of our youth group as being us plus those other teenagers. I don't remember any of them. So,
because it was like they came maybe Sunday morning, and then when we had neighborhood Bible time, they would come during that time too. But it was also, we were placed on this a little bit bigger pedestal when it came to neighborhood Bible time, because it was, you can work during the day. And all of this was to show how good we were, or that we were good enough to go on mission trips. Because you had to do so much. You had to fill out so much. You had to fill out your daily devotions, which, not gonna lie, me and Sarah both did these in our car 20 minutes before the youth group happened. I would just fill out, because even though, I was like, I have Bible class every single day at school. Why, I never fully understood the concept of devotions. And I think had it not been put in the way that they put it, I might've been like, oh, okay, it's to maybe to find a little bit of a closer walk. But to me, it was just like, this is something extra. And that was it. You had to do all of this stuff. And it was like a strict regimen just so you could go on this mission trip to do the same thing that you were doing on Saturday mornings, but in a foreign country.
I mean, like you're saying, like we had to go through all these, like, spiritual disciplines to go on the mission trip so that we could paint the walls in that school.
To paint the walls, to sweep the floors. All while having to wear our culottes like well below our knees.
Oh man. I had a dream the other night that I was at a summer camp, and I wanted the attention of and we were adults. I remember we were at a summer camp, but I remember like, oh, everybody here seems like a grown up. And there's these very cute girls whose attention I wanted. And I looked down and realized I was wearing culottes, and that's why they wouldn't talk to me. And I was like, oh no, and then the dream was over. And I was like,
awful memories.
Yep, it's still in there.
Yeah. I looking up some of the stuff that I was going through, I remembered like the summer camps that we went to, and just you can't, you have to wear a very dark colored t-shirt, and you have to wear this. And it got to the point where one of them, I guess the Wilds, wanted the girls to actually wear pants when they would go tubing, because they were afraid their culottes would ride up.
Yeah.
And we all told them, we were like, our church doesn't let us wear pants. Like, we can't do it.
I think we were going towards the end there, we were going to the culottes only week, because like less and less churches were enforcing that, but we were in that special bunch that still was.
Yeah.
And there was like 1 or 2 weeks in the summer that were like all the churches who were culottes only would come. So you're only surrounded by kids that dress like you. Oh man.
Because I remember we took our senior trip was there too.
Yep.
But I remember being able, like, the school wasn't quite so, you could wear pants on your senior trip, because we went whitewater rafting too, I guess. But the school's a whole different brand. The school wasn't quite as bad as the church.
No,
to a degree.
No, I agree. The school is an odd memory for me. I don't have all bad or all good. I have like mixed bag of memories about the school, and it had strict sort of like boxes that it wanted us to adhere to. But I mean, you remember our senior class, like people were sleeping around. At one point we had that dear girl's name, I forget, who was like living with her abusive boyfriend and got pregnant, and like people were doing anything at that point. And so, I think she got kicked out she did get pregnant. But I mean, that was it. That was all that would get you kicked out. It had to be like so obvious, that it broke their rules. I'm sure there were definitely people doing drugs, at least in the class below us,
Oh,
so
for sure.
So yeah, it was an interesting, I mean, that's the weird thing about Christian schools is like you get some of the really good kids whose parents are raising them as like trying to really control be like super Christian, and then like a smattering of middle of the road, and then you get like the kids that got kicked out from public school.
Yeah.
It's a really weird mix.
And the funny thing is like anytime I tell people that I went to a Christian school, they were like, oh, you were one of those girls. And I'm like, no, not really. But I mean, I knew some. I knew some that are now trying to be holier than thou. But I'm like, I knew you in high school. I knew what you were doing.
Yeah.
But I'm the bad one.
Yeah.
But that's it. That's like, I'm not one to, like, if you have gotten a divorce or you have whatever, or you slept with someone before you got married, I could really care less.
Right.
But don't paint yourself to be better or more of a Christian than me just because I've voted Democrat. I'm not straight, and I choose to maybe occasionally have a drink or whatever. Yeah. Don't paint yourself as better than me, because you've got skeletons too. I mean, if it makes you feel any better to do this, then check yourself. And that's what I have always said, like, even to my own mother, I'm like, if someone's sexuality makes you so uncomfortable and makes you think that you're losing your faith, there's something already in you that is making that happen. They're not doing anything to you.
Yeah.
They're just living their life,
It's not a personal attack.
It's not a personal attack on you. Like, no, they're just choosing that they love who they love. That's all they're trying to do. Yeah. They're trying to get, to be able to marry who they want and have equal, like, health insurance. Yeah, all any of us want.
Yeah, really. Stability and health insurance.
Yeah. And it's the same to me for, anyone that's transgendered. I'm like, they think it's just some attack on, like, oh, well, they were born how they were supposed to be born. Well, not to them. Like, they didn't choose to decide to become, female or male. This was already something that was there. This was already something in them. They just feel I was born with the wrong parts. They're not doing anything at all to hurt you or your faith. Like that's something that's on you. And I think if more people could just mind their own business and stop thinking that it's an attack on them, I think the world will be a little bit of a better place.
No, absolutely. And I do feel like people, they are reacting like out of fear, like your existence threatens my beliefs. Like, cause you're like you're saying, like, what are they doing to you to make you lose your faith? It's like, they're not, but the fact that they exist and maybe they seem happy, maybe they seem content, maybe they seem like, all these things, like that causes fear because you're now, universal view of if I live my life this way, I'll be good, and those people will be damned and they'll be unhappy and yada, yada. Right. So like mental dissonance cognitive dissonance that you can't get over. But I mean, also like, I'm just like, just sit with someone and talk to them. I will tell you, the nicest people I know, the gentlest and I just think it's because they've been through so much shit are my transgender friends.
Yeah.
And that's not to like stereotype them and like they all have to be like super sweet and kind, but I have never met more gentle, accepting, warm, and embracing souls than my transgender friends. Like, and they have just put up with so much in life that they are just like, you know what, I accept you the way you are, and I will be loving. And you're like, everybody should be like you.
It's true. And I mean, there are some still in the whole. I mean, as a whole, though, to me, the whole LGBTQ community is what I would think that a church would want to be like. The whole acceptance, the love that they feel, and the fact that they're like, you can be whoever you want to be. You have some in there that are obviously, you still got everywhere. Some that are, but it's true. Like,
does not automatically make you a nice person, but
like some of the nicest people, same that I've met have been, or even, have come out as non-binary because they don't want to have to, not that they don't want to have to choose, they just don't feel either way. And it's something that I've really had to try to get a lot better because several of my associates that work for me are non-binary. So I'm having to learn to really use the they, them pronouns and being very conscious about it. And they are so appreciative when you try your hardest to be accepting of them. And it makes me sad to think that like people that we know, people that we went to church with, that we grew up with would make that snide he, she, sir. And it's sad because I'm like, they, that it's really hard for them. It's already hard enough for them out in the world. The last thing they need is someone to derogatory and to say what they don't want to be called.
I mean, it is so bizarre in some ways. It's like, in what other context do people feel the need to like take a stand? Like, what if you were like, you know what, I'd rather be called Rachel than Rebecca.
Yeah.
And people were like, nope, I refuse. I'm going to call you Rebecca. You're like, but I get to pick, like, and so I think that's a bit of a head scratcher. It's like, so if someone asks you to refer to them in a particular way and you feel moderately inconvenienced by it, like, okay, and you feel a little uncomfortable because sometimes you mess up. Okay, all right, I get that. That's not a super great feeling, but like, try.
Like, you try. And I was there for a very long time. I would call them by their name. And I was like, it's great and it's fine. It's helping me not to make a mistake, but it's also not affirming what they want to affirm. It's the same with like, if you have someone that's, that is going from being male to female or female to male, and they want to use the different pronouns there too. I almost think that's a little bit easier, but at the same time, it's still a learning process, but be a good human being and just try to do it. That's really the whole point, is just be a good human being and try to do it. It's the same for like, especially like us. If you date someone outside of your family or church's preferred gender, be open, be accepting about it. You don't have to, I don't want to say you don't have to love it, because that just disaffirms anything that I feel, but like, don't be a dick.
Right. Yeah, there's a difference. Yeah. Try, like you said. I think try and kindness, like, these things go a long way.
Well, I think we've actually gone through quite a bit of stuff, and this has been a very, very good conversation. I've enjoyed this a lot.
Same.
Yeah.
So glad we got to chat and catch up a little bit.
Yeah. So for everyone out there that is going through maybe wanting to come out in any way, shape, or form, what is your biggest piece of advice, especially in a setting like what we grew up in for the last thing?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a good question. I think I would just say, like, you're probably scared, but you know what? It's okay. You don't have to wait till you're not scared to make a move. If I had waited until I wasn't afraid, and fear was a big driver in my life and still can be.
Yeah.
But if I'd waited till I was not afraid to make any choices to step away, like, I would never have done it. And actually, you don't die. Like, you think I'm gonna die if I try this, if I step away. My therapist described this one time. I was complaining about how uncomfortable it was to change, and she said, well, you've never been here before, and so it's kind of like you're in the forest at night. It's dark, and you run into some things, and you're not totally sure where you are, and it's not real comfortable. But your faith background told you that there was also a cliff that you were going to fall off if you took the wrong step. That's not true. It may be uncomfortable, but you're not going to fall off a cliff. And I have taken that and repeated it to myself many times. It's like, I know this is uncomfortable. It's okay. You're not going to fall off a cliff. Like, just keep trying. And a year from now, a month from now, 10 years from now, you'll look back and be like, oh, I'm okay.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that is very much a good piece of advice, because I know we all felt, and I felt it too. It was kind of somehow you were going to lose God's love if you veered off this path. And it's not in any way, shape, or form. I've felt a stronger faith going out as I have. And, obviously there are people whose parents are going to disown them, but find a community, like, find your community, find your, family isn't always the one you were born into. You can have a chosen one as well. And sometimes it's better, and it makes you happier. So,
yep. That's real.
Yep. All right. Well, guys, I'm going to end this recording. And this has been a great episode.